Welcome to Event Icons, everyone, where you get to chat with the icons of the event industry. I'm Lindsay Martin-Bilbrey, and we've got Alex Plaxton here today. And today we're going to be talking about crisis communications. So let's get to it.
It's Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, so you know what that means. It's time for another episode of #Event Icons,
presented by Endless Events.
The show where you get to ask the icons of the events industry anything.
Just go to www.event-icons.com to ask questions.
Our iconic guests will answer them live during the entire show. Before we get started, the more people we have watching, the better the conversation. So please help share #Event Icons
on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Just tell your friends to watch at www.event-icons.com.
Now, without any further delay, this is #Event Icons.
All right, now here's the point in the presentation and the normal podcast where we do this really great introduction of our esteemed guest. But today we're going to do something a little bit different, and I'm really excited about it because Alex is our featured guest today. And he is going to spill everything he knows about crisis communications, which I don't know if you've been watching the news lately, but as an event professional, whether you're looking here at home or abroad, it seems like this issue is one that as an industry, we really can't be ignoring.
Yeah, so I'm very excited to be the guest on today's show. It's been a long time since I've been a guest, but we thought this topic was really, really important. It's something that I've been doing a lot of research and I've been speaking on for the last 2 years almost. And there's so much information, and it's really important that we understand fully not only what it takes to create a crisis communications plan, but what is it, what happens if you don't have one or you have a poorly executed one, and who are the players involved to really execute on crisis communications well, because it is important. And we'll talk about a few case studies, a few incidents. I'll name some names. I'm not afraid to. I think we learn best when we know, actual real world examples. But yeah, so I'm excited to talk about crisis communications today.
So this is actually something like, it seems kind of elementary, I think, to say what is crisis communications, but at every industry event that I go to, I feel like we're seeing more and more sessions, but they don't all have the same baseline. So in your opinion, Alex, what is crisis communications and why is it important to us as event professionals?
Yeah, so I think we oftentimes confuse crisis communications with crisis management. A lot of people know about crisis management and they've been learning about it for years. But the reality is, and a lot of them have crisis management plans, but the reality is that crisis communications is usually like a line in the crisis management plan, when in reality you need a full plan. And crisis communications is, how do you communicate both internally and externally when there is a crisis? And that includes before, during, and after. All of those things need to be included in the plan. We oftentimes think, oh, well, when the crisis happens, we'll figure it out. But sometimes that's too late. And we've learned that through some real world examples that have happened recently in the past couple of years, that in the age of social media, we don't have time to sit and figure it out when something happens. If you don't have a plan in place already, that that's the other key, right? Like, you can't just create a plan. You have to know the plan and be trained how to execute it. If you haven't done those things, there's a lot at risk, and we'll talk about some of those things.
But that's actually a really good starting point, because whose job is it to do that? Is it the marketer's job, the comms team, the C-suite, the event professional, a committee? God save us if it's a committee's job, we'll never get it written. But like, who do you see being the most successful person there?
So every time I've taught this topic, this comes up, and I even ask on a slide, it's like, is this your job? And it's usually a mixed bag. Some people think it is, some people don't. And the reality is, it's kind of everyone's job. When you are creating the plan, the first thing you need to do, which is the foundation of your plan, is brainstorm potential crises. And not only one person can do that, because we all live in our own little silo and our own little bubble, and we have our own perspective. You really need a team to think of all those potential crises that could happen. And that includes your CEO, your CFO, all the heads of every department in your organization, someone who's a representative from a legal team, whether that's someone internally or someone that you contract out with, and also your marketing team. It's really, really important. If you're an association, you need someone from your membership side. You need someone from your education, your journals, things like that. You need people from all these different areas, because they're all going to have different perspectives on not only what can go wrong, but how important is it when that goes wrong. Like,
right,
what,
it's different
what
response times to a succession crisis versus an active shooter.
Right. But the reality is, when it comes push to shove, on site at an event, since we are talking crisis communications for an event, the event planner knows their event best, and they're going to know what's at risk. They're going to know the history of their event. No one knows their event better than them. If they are not part of every piece of the process, at least in writing it, not necessarily executing on the plan, although depending on the severity of the crisis, they will have to get involved at some point,
right.
And make some decisions. But they still need to be involved in the process of writing and creating that plan at every step of that process.
So when you're coaching on this and kind of guiding through, like, think through the process of, like, how does that start? Like, is this a place where it's like when you're brainstorming a theme for an event, like, does everybody get in the room with sticky notes and be like, today at my event, this is what's happening, killer sharks? Or, I don't need to like downplay it, but it's terrible. Like, no one wants to be the person that writes active shooter on the thing. So how would you guide through that? Because I think, like, severity wise, people are probably nervous to say what they do see as a crisis and get other people's feedback on it, because there are these terrible things that are happening.
Yeah, so typically there's 2 steps in the brainstorming process. The first step is to brainstorm potential things that can go wrong. And usually what I'll do is work with the team and have all those people in the room or on a phone call or something. But you need all those people in the meeting. And then we go category by category. So I like to break it up into category. If you just go in there and you're like, okay, guys, what can go wrong? It's really overwhelming. But I find when you break it down into categories, it becomes less overwhelming. So those categories, are weather related, unexpected crisis, sudden crisis, which would be in the case of like an active shooter. A smoldering crisis, which is something that builds over time. This is where your marketing team comes into play. This is where they're observing your social media feeds, looking for potential risks and issues that might arise that may seem small in the beginning, but may grow as you get closer to your events. Financial risks. So it's kind of difficult to have that conversation when you have all these heads of departments and the CEOs and the CFOs. But you do need to talk about corporate crises where, there is wrongdoing by the people in the organization. And it's really hard to be like, well, potentially someone in this room could be embezzling money, but you still need to bring it up.
Oh my God. Like, I just saw the social media and then happening on site, and you just physically made me anxious.
But it's true, right? Like,
right,
it happened with Fire Festival. No one, I don't think a lot of those people in the room knew the kinds of wheelings and dealings going on in the background with all the money being stolen and things like that. But if they had a conversation about what could go wrong, that is something that can go wrong. You hear about these things all the time where someone gets fired or let go from an organization because they were embezzling money or doing some wrongdoing. So that's something you have to bring up. Any potential fights that can occur, whether amongst staff or amongst attendees, especially if it gets, violent and physical. Because in today's day and age, what's the first thing that people do when a fight breaks out?
Videotape it.
They videotape it. Exactly. So we don't call for help anymore. We take out our phones, not to call for help, but to videotape it and throw it up on Facebook or YouTube.
Yeah.
which is sad but true.
Mhm.
And those types of videos can then become major crises for your organization and your event.
Yeah.
So all of these things, if you break it down into different categories, are a lot easier to brainstorm. The second step is taking that list of every single potential thing that could go wrong and putting it into a risk assessment matrix, which is what's the probability that this could happen and what is the potential, severity of how that affects us. So if it would cause severe damage, but it's unlikely to happen, that's probably a medium risk.
So how do
Right.
you quantify that? Is that something where like, do you have the matrix where you can say, this is probably this, or is it something knowing how your organization works and their approach to risk and the different ways that you mitigate it or handle it once you get it out? Like, is it a mix of both? How do you figure out? Because I feel like, everyone knows active shooter bad, financial crisis good, but like the CEO has stage 4 cancer and he comes to the show and he unfortunately has to leave. Sometimes it's under good circumstances, sometimes it's bad. That could happen, but it's different organizations would react differently, I think.
Yeah, so it depends on your organization. This is why you don't have any cookie cutter crisis communications plans, because
Mm-hmm.
again, this brainstorming process is the foundation of your plan. This is how you're going to build out your plan, and every organization's risks are going to be different. But basically, it's pretty easy. You say, is this unlikely to happen, likely to happen, or very likely to happen? So, 1, 2, or 3.
Right.
And you figure it out and you debate, and it's not that important that you should be spending a lot of time on this.
Mm-hmm.
And then, what's the severity of if it happens, how is it going to affect us? So is it going to be not harmful at all, harmful, or very harmful? And then you just take that, those 2 lines and you figure out okay, this is very likely to happen, but not harmful. So this is a medium risk. So there's low risks, medium risk, high risk, and very high risk. Very high risk is going to be you're very likely to happen and very harmful. Now, when you're doing this process, you have to remember that potentially things can change. So a bomb threat, for example, might be unlikely because you've never had one in your organization and you don't have protesters and you're not really expecting it to happen. But if a week out from your event, you start getting some threats from some people, well, maybe you go back and you look and that has now increased from a low risk to a medium risk.
So who's monitoring that? Because I really liked when you talked about the smoldering crises. Is that something where, as part of the weekly ramp ups, as you're getting closer to your event, this needs to be a check-in, not just from a crisis plan perspective? Because I'm thinking about the events that we run, that's not always on our check-in milestone list.
Yeah, it's something that you should be monitoring. It's why it's important that you have all these people in the room so that everyone is aware that this plan exists and that it can be it's a living document and that it can be edited, right? So if your marketing team sees something a little weird online, they can bring it to someone's attention and say, oh, well, maybe that's related to this. We should raise the level of this risk. And it's not that important that you are going to have to completely change your crisis communications plan. It's just more of an awareness of, okay, this is now this level, right? So if this were to happen, this is how we're going to respond based on the level of risk.
Kind of like they do at the airport. We're now at an orange. Proceed with caution.
Exactly. Yeah. No one expects their keynote to not show up, right? But if 2 days before the event happens, you start hearing about flight cancellations and snowstorms and things like that, well, maybe that risk is now higher. And maybe
Right.
it's
Yeah.
you want to be more aware of, right? So it's not so much of okay, at Tuesday at noon, we're going to look at all the things and see if anything's gone up. It's more of an as things happen, this is top of mind for everyone because we've all worked on this plan and we all know this plan. So just let everyone know that this could potentially be a higher risk.
So from a pre-show perspective, what else should you do from a best practices? Because I know there's so much that I want to like delve into on site if ish goes wrong. But what does that look like? Anything else pre-show that we should have asked you about that we haven't?
Yeah. So a lot of times we forget that we are the authority, right? There's been studies that have happened that have said that the first place that people go to in a crisis for information is the social media accounts of those they view as the authority on what is happening. So at your event, that's going to be your social media accounts, right? So it's really, really important that you establish that authority. And there's two folds to that. The first is if you don't have social media channels that people are following, make sure you let them know in the event of a crisis at the event, please make sure you're following us because that's where we're going to be bringing, things to your attention, right? So that's like number one. Just let people know that they should be following you because this is where you're going to be letting them know about information. The second is, that's if you have social media, great. If you don't, make sure you have it and you let people know that.
Right.
I have heard CEOs go, okay, well, maybe we need to let everyone know on Instagram. And I'm like, cool, we don't have an Instagram. We'll make one and let everyone know. Well, we have no followers there. No one's going to know to follow us. Once a crisis happens, it is too late to then create a social media presence. It's too late. The other side of it is a lot of events do not ramp up their social media until a couple weeks out. So they'll have handles for the event that will be dormant for 8 months out of the year.
Oh.
And so what happens is, if 2 months out, I'm going to your social media because maybe I want to share on social media that I just registered for the event. Right. So I want to see what the event hashtag is. Couldn't find it on your website, so I go to your social media to see, well, what hashtag are they using? And I see that you have not tweeted out anything in 8 months. Okay. If I don't check your Twitter account again until I'm on site when a crisis is happening, guess what? I'm not going to your Twitter account because I'm going to assume you aren't using it, even if a week later you started to use it. It's really important that you stay up to date, even if you're just posting completely mundane posts.
Happy National Donut Day!
Just to let people know that you're still an active account is really, really important. Because if you're not active and someone thinks you're not active, you've lost your authority. And when you lose your authority and when people can't find information from the authority, that's where things like long-term distress happens for attendees of an event. So if they're looking for information, they can't find it from the authority, they start looking for it other places, they can't find it, or they find misinformation and misinformation gets spread. There are studies that long-term mental distress can be caused by this. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to cause my attendees long-term mental distress.
Yeah, because I feel like then they won't come back and they'll go to somebody else's event, which will then cause me long-term distress.
It costs you so much more to hire a PR company and then market after a crisis than it would to create a crisis communications plan and train your staff. Like, trust me, if you're doing a cost analysis, it develops trust with your attendees having a crisis communications plan and executing on it. But two, if you don't have a plan and a crisis does happen, it is very, very difficult to get that trust back. And you're not going to be able to get those attendees back very easily without spending a lot of money.
So you mentioned something that I think is really important, the training aspect of it, because it's not only that digital channel of communication that's an authority, it's also anybody who's answering the phone and like taking all of those instances and basically saying, here are phrases that we need to be consistent in using, because you don't want to cause a panic, especially if someone's seen something and have a rumor. So what does the pre-show training kind of look like?
Yeah, so oftentimes someone from your marketing team or social media intern or someone will be in charge of social media. And if that's one of the main ways that you're communicating with your attendees during a crisis, which it should be, if your attendees, be aware of where your attendees are,
Right.
and communicate to them there appropriately, and don't just use one modality of communication. If use email, use your website, use social media, etc. But if you are using social media, you have to talk to the people who are responsible for your social media, and they need to be trained in crisis communications. They need to know your plan, because what happens and why we hear about these events where there's an active shooter and then they go silent for 24 hours is because their marketing team or their social media team was not trained to handle it correctly. So they just go dark. It's happened twice now at two major event shootings that have gotten national news, international news really, where the organization that was very active on social media just goes silent for 24 hours. Then they issue some legalese statement, thoughts and prayers, etc. And that's it. And then you never hear from them again. And it's a big problem. I don't know who told everyone that if something bad happens at your event, you should just be silent and not address it.
Feels like an attorney. Yeah.
Pretty sure it's an attorney. But that's a terrible way to execute on a crisis communications plan. Now, if you have a plan that a legal team has already approved and you have holding statements, then you're clear. The problem people run into and the reason they go silent is because they're afraid that their legal team isn't going to, they're going to do something wrong that'll get them in legal trouble. Well, if you already have a plan and your legal team has already reviewed it, you're good to go. So that's really important. That's another thing, with the training you need to do ahead of time. But do some crisis communications training for your staff. And that includes how to respond to certain questions, how long to respond between responses, whether to answer questions or not, when to be silent, when to say nothing at all. Not all crises are created equal. Not all of them require a response.
Right.
Knowing when not to say anything at all is just as important as knowing when to say something. But also customer service training. Right? When crises happen, you get a lot of people asking a lot of questions, and you have to be trained in customer service, and a lot of marketers are not.
We're quippy. We're not friendly. We're quippy.
Right, which is why a lot of big corporations have a separate customer service account on Twitter that separates their customer service from their marketing. But we don't all have that kind of bandwidth, nor do we need multiple accounts for customer service. But it's really important that if you do not have separate teams for that, your marketers need to be trained in customer service.
So I guess that kind of brings us into like the actual execution of it. And you've mentioned broadly that you've seen recently two that just didn't do it well. So take us through some case studies. What's happening out there right now where you're seeing some really great successes and some really amazing opportunities for other groups that might be considering either revamping or creating a new crisis communication plan?
Yeah. So, the two off the top of my mind that unfortunately executed very poorly, which were the ones that just went silent, were the Harvest Festival shooting in Las Vegas a couple years ago. They went silent for 24 hours, and then they actually deleted every single one of their social media posts and then posted their legal statement. And it was signed by two initials that no one knew who those initials were for. It was just not handled very well. In fact, I believe if you go to their website now, the legal statement is still up there. Same with their social media. But that's all you'll find. They deleted every single other post. And then the
personalization piece of that, like people are struggling with the loss of it, and then that loss of community that was built up, that's painful.
Yeah, and then the Gilroy Garlic Festival shooting that happened recently, they also went silent. I don't think they did for 24 hours, but it was at least 12 hours before they responded at all and posted anything. And for both instances, the police departments were extremely active on social media sharing information. So it would have been extremely easy to, in both of those situations, do a targeted messaging where you're retargeting, telling people to go to the other accounts that are acting as more of an authority in this situation. So the Las Vegas PD or the Gilroy, PD. So both situations, they could have done that, and that would have been enough, and then pinned those posts to the top of their social media. So that's an option there. Or just retweeting those tweets from the police department, right? So both instances would have shared important information that needed to be shared, but also showed that they cared about, I'm not saying they did not care,
Right.
but from a brand perspective, if you go silent when something really bad happens like that for such a long period of time, people are going to make assumptions, and they're going to get angry, and they're going to lose trust. Which, if you go back and you look at the hashtags and things like that of people who were there looking for information, you see a lot of anger and a lot of people who are upset that they're just not responding.
What's really interesting to me is that 24 hours or 12 hours even has become a really long time. I mean, in a crisis, being able to respond quickly and effectively is always valuable, but the fact that you don't even have a full day, and let's say, God forbid, like someone on your staff, the person whose job it is to do the thing, like, I can only imagine what it feels like behind the scenes. Yeah. And then you're doing that. It's just, that's kind of tough. So,
well, that's why it's also important that you have backup to take over the handle in case something does happen to someone, God forbid.
Right.
But you're right. 12 hours, 24 hours is too long, especially when you consider it in the event perspective, right? A lot of our events aren't even, 24 hours
long. Yeah.
Right. So you just don't have the time, and people need answers right away. I attended an event over the summer where there was not an incident at our event, but there was an incident down the street. And it caused people to not be able to get to their hotels, things like that for a little bit. Streets were being blocked off. And, it took the organization probably longer than it should have to put out any notifications on the app. I'm not going to say who it was.
No, I know. It was funny because I was at an industry event this weekend, and somebody who was also at that same event, almost verbatim, Alex, was telling me this story. And it was funny, like they actually were like tweeting back in, do you mean the thing that happened at the thing over there? Because we've been cleared here. Can't we just get on the bus? And like, because it was a bunch of, they were like, no, we're good here. But that's really funny because like when your attendees have more information than you do that actually has come from an authoritative source, what does that do to the cycle of communications?
I mean, I had heard about the incident probably an hour, 45 minutes to an hour before the event had notified us about the incident.
Yeah.
And so I had gotten texts from people, are you safe? Are you okay? Family, friends, because it had already been, international news, really.
Right.
So
even though they were so veiled about it because the country that it happened in is so much more polite versus the U.S., which is slightly more inflammatory.
And granted, they did do a good job. Yeah. They did let us know about it, and they wanted to, and I understand their point of view. They wanted to gather the information and make sure they had all the information beforehand. But when you get texts from, that's where you need to know in your crisis communications plan, do we need to put something out sooner? Because my parents and my friends back home are already texting me, are you safe? Are you okay? And I'm sitting in a keynote. I didn't even know anything had happened. Right. So now I'm concerned because I haven't heard anything has happened. And so now I'm on my phone, which is interrupting the keynote, and I'm looking for information, looking for articles, things like that. So it becomes a situation where it's, do you want your attendees to know before you've let them know? And what does that say about the trust level, right?
I think that's too interesting from a risk management perspective, going back to is this risky towards my event? Because that particular use case sometimes we can't see outside of our bubbles. Like we think about like the big acts of God and like all the things that could happen inside what we can control. Like I can't control the Boston Marathon is an excellent example. I can't control that. The police aren't necessarily going to do it, but there were 7 meetings that were disrupted, either that were supposed to be moving in, getting out. So it wasn't just the person who was down the street. It was all of these other things around it. And again, it's one of those things that it's unfortunate. We have to consider all of those and make assessments off it, but but
that's why you asked about what to do beforehand, and that's why you need to work with your partners. You need to work with your venues, find out what other events are going on in the venue at the same time, because whoever's monitoring your social media for your event should also be monitoring theirs to find out if something potentially happens at one of those events that is on site at the same venue you are.
Would you get the police or one of the other and just like saying, hey, we're coming into town? And because if you're not the DNC, like, why would you call the cops, right? But like, that's another piece of it, like as a partner sitting at the table that I've never even considered. And you're not wrong because you are taking over the city.
If you have 1,000, 2,000 people attending your event, absolutely you need to be in touch with the police department, letting them know you're bringing this many people to town, you're going to be in this area. You need to be talking to your security team, whoever you've hired, those partners. These are all partners that need to be involved in the crisis communications plan. You need to have their contact information in your plan. And some police departments are going to be very active on social media and some aren't. I brought up 2 examples where the police department is extremely active, but not all cities are going to have very active social media presences for their police department. So it's important that you know that beforehand. Can you rely on retargeting for information to the police department? Are they going to be active in the event of an emergency? If they're not, then don't plan to retarget to them. Right. So it's important that, especially if your event travels city to city every year, it's important that you follow up and, relook at your plan and make some edits and make changes depending on the information that you're able to gather from your partners.
Right. So in a perfect world, when something imperfect happens, what is the right response time?
So there's something called a holding statement. A holding statement is a pre-written tweet or social media post that has already been pre-approved by legal. It's usually somewhat vague. It can usually hit on a lot of potential risks and potential crises that could happen at your event. So it can apply to many different things. But it could be something as simple as, we are aware of the situation and we are currently executing on our crisis plans. We will be in touch with more information in the next 10 minutes, right? Don't worry, we have your safety is first of mind, something like that. Doesn't say what the crisis was. It doesn't say how exactly you're responding to it. It says you're following your plan, which gives people comfort. And
it says that you have a plan.
Right. It says you have a plan.
That right there is like, they've got it. Okay, good.
It assures people that their safety is priority number 1. But at the same time, it doesn't give that much information. But if you put that out the second that you hear something happen, because you've already written it, then someone goes to your social media, they know that you're aware of the situation, and they know that in the next 10 minutes, you're going to be putting out more information. And if in 10 minutes you don't have more information, you then need to put out another statement saying, at this time, we have no additional information. However, make sure that you're following the blah, blah, blah PD department on Twitter. We'll be retweeting as we get more information. We're here to answer your questions if you have any, if we know that information. But, we'll put out another message in 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes, right? And then once things have died down and once things have resolved, then you can kind of stop doing that. But you need to be aware of monitoring the responses. Are people happy with that response, or are they concerned? Do they have more questions, right? Are you hearing a lot of the same questions? Then maybe you want to address that in another statement. So it's really important then that you're monitoring not only, is this post getting lots of likes and retweets, or are people responding and they're angry? You have to be monitoring that, because how you respond after that is going to be dependent on the information that you get about the crisis and then how people are responding to it.
So let's talk escalation and de-escalation strategies, because you can build the best response matrix in the entire world, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the people who are making the calls. So, what are some of those best practices and warning signals people should be watching for, and how do you help de-escalate or know when to go and go, we need more help than this?
Yeah, it's a training that I call the ABCs. It's very common in PR. But it's a way to communicate your message and address people's concerns. So basically, and you can do it as an improv exercise with whoever's going to be your spokespeople.
Right.
So you should train them all in this exercise. But A is address the question. So if someone, and before you do any of this, you should know what the message is that you're trying to get across. Right? So, A, address their question. So whatever they're asking for, kind of just restate the question. So what I'm hearing is this, I understand that you're asking me this. And then you want to do a bridge. So that's where B comes in. You want to bridge to whatever your message is going to be. So that could be something like, what we really want to make sure you fully understand is this. What our number one priority is this. We understand that you're asking this, so we want to make sure that you know this, right? And they may not, your message may be completely unrelated to the question, but that's why the bridge is so important.
Right.
Because it bridges to then what C is, which is communicating your message. So I understand that you're asking this. Our number one priority at this moment is the message, right? And that's a really easy way to make people feel like they're being heard, but also getting your message across.
So what does an example of that look like or sound like?
Are we going to do an improv exercise?
Yeah. Walk me through it. Help me improv. I'm terrible at improv. No funny over here.
So let's pick a crisis.
Okay.
I've got one. It's a great one. It's a true one that actually happened that I heard about. From an attendee. Their event was at a stadium, and the toilets started to back up.
Oh, that is a crisis.
Yeah. So that's the crisis, right? So as the event planner, what is the message that you're trying to get across?
The facilities is coming to help.
Okay.
I'm so execution driven. I don't know. I don't even know how.
No, that's fine. If that's the place where you are right now, great. The place where this incident actually went to was they had to cancel the event because and they had to send everyone home because there were no bathrooms for 20,000 people to use. Right. So they had to shut down the event.
It's like as a whole, every single toilet was overflowing and not just in a section of the stadium.
The system was backed up. It was not.
Wow. There's so many jokes here that will be so mad if I used any of my words.
They had to shut down the event, and people had been tailgating at the event since 6 a.m. There were a lot of very intoxicated people. There were a lot of angry people, right? So that's the situation. So as I've heard about this, I am media, I'm press, I'm at the event. There's been a stop in the event and we're wondering what's going to happen. So I'm going to ask you, we heard that there's something really bad happening at the stadium. Is it a bomb threat?
So going back to my notes. So I heard, what I heard you say is there a bomb threat? See, I'm doing this wrong. This is why we practice. I don't know, on the spot. I'm so terrible at this. Give me the response. I can't do it. I feel under pressure.
This is why it's important that you do this type of training with your spokespeople, right?
They don't let me be the spokesperson. I fix the problems. I don't talk on the news.
But it is. It's why it's important, right?
So much pressure.
So what I could say is, what I'm hearing is that you're concerned about a bomb threat. What I want you to know is that safety is our number one priority, and that it is not a bomb threat, and that no one's lives are at risk. We are currently assessing the situation, and we will be back in touch within the half hour to let everyone know how we're going to proceed.
Wow, that's really good. Yeah, you'd have to write it. I'd have to practice for sure.
Right? But
Yeah.
I've practiced this. I've taught this, right? So the first thing I did was address your concern about the bomb threat, and really what you were asking is everyone going to be safe, right? So I addressed that. I bridged that and said, our number one priority is safety. But what I want you to know is that we haven't made a decision yet about how we're going to proceed, and we will let you know within the half hour, right? So I bought us 30 minutes of decision-making time. I've let you know that don't worry, everyone's going to be safe. We don't want to cause panic. Enjoy yourselves. But something is happening, and we're going to address it soon.
Yeah, I don't know that I would say enjoy myself. If they'd been drinking and the bathrooms have gone down, again, like, I'm just, like, how do you even do that? Francis is making fun of me. Okay. Oh, so we actually have a question that's come in, and we're going to divert off the fact that Lindsay's terrible at crisis management. Okay, so do you ever include in crisis plans how you might use event, convention, hotel shuttle buses for helping people to get away from a situation like an active shooter or a bomb threat? Do you get that specific to give directions? So you've come onto, we'll go back to the execution. You've come, something's happened, and now you're using, you're the people that are doing it rather than diverting to the police. How does that actually play out?
Yeah, so once you execute, and that's why the crisis communications plan, it kind of goes hand in hand with your crisis management plan. Coordinating the travel away with those shuttle buses, things like that, that's going to be part of your crisis management plan. But how you communicate that information to your attendees is what's going to be part of your crisis communications plan. So that could potentially be tweets that go out. That could be notifications on the app. If you have a chat bot, those can be push notifications there. They could be text notifications. If everyone's in a keynote when something happens, if you've already discussed with your keynote the potential of being a voice during a crisis, then your AV partner can throw something up on the confidence monitor, and your keynote speaker can then read it. So there's lots of different ways that you can communicate that information. But absolutely, if there was a crisis and you needed people to be aware of transportation away from the crisis, then yeah, that's something that you would be working with.
You just uncovered 3 of my worst nightmares right there, because in the past, I know some groups have hired speakers who we're going to give them a shot on the main stage, and that person's really reliant on the confidence monitor, and they just read it. But I think, again, going back to training, it's not just, again, we've got that internal blinder on. We're only going to train our people, our volunteers, involve the police when necessary. But essentially those speakers and other people, like your industry experts that you have in your breakout rooms, like the training that has to come out and the practicing. I mean, I talk to people for a living and help them do the things, but I couldn't even role play with you right there on the spot. So, I think that's also a really valuable call out to make sure that you can assess, is the person on your main stage someone you want to have help communicate those things in a crisis? And if they're not, how do you help them also understand their role so that they don't naturally try to do that? Because, everybody wants to be a helper.
Everyone wants to be a helper. You also don't want to cause panic. So if they do not agree, because again, you need to make sure that they are aware this is something that can happen. They've agreed that they are willing to do this. They've been trained in the potential risks involved. And make sure that, it really should be in their contract that this is an ask that you are making of them. So this is a conversation.
Wow.
This is a conversation you need to be making, because this is their personal brand too, right? If they don't handle it, if they handle it poorly, it can reflect on their brand as a keynote speaker. So it's really important that you're actually having these conversations as you are booking your keynote speaker. And it's fine if they're not willing to do that. But then you still need to let them know that in the event of a crisis, this is the process. Someone will walk out onto the stage. They will have a red index card that they will hold up that will let you know that they're about to make an announcement, or the voice of God is going to come up. There's going to be a red light that flashes in the back of the room, et cetera, just so that you're not caught off guard and you can come to a natural stopping point and let the person speak. Because you, again, don't want to cause panic. You don't want to say, why is someone coming on stage right now? I'm not done. Right? You want to let them know what the signals are, that they're going to be interrupted and it's important. Right?
Yeah.
So all of that training is important.
But like you bring up a good point too there for the contract, because I mean, I think about nearly every single boilerplate out there. There's an indemnification clause for you don't have to pay, or no one's going to be financially responsible or legally responsible. But I can't think of a single contract I've signed in the last 5 years that has something like, you know, if this happens, we would expect, like an expectations clause, because it just doesn't necessarily come up in the day-to-day scope of work, which is what you're usually concentrating on. And so that's, I think, a really valuable tip, Alex, that you just shared there, that I'm now going to go in and have an attorney.
Well, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an expectation. Again, there should be an ask, and it should be the contract, but just so that, you know, look, it can make a keynote even more valuable if they're willing to do it. You know, that could be something new that keynotes are including is, hey, I'm trained in crisis communications. I'm willing to be the voice in the event of a crisis for you. And I'm good. I am trained. I know how to handle this. I know how to mitigate the panic, blah, blah, blah. Versus a keynote who is going to have to be stopped on stage, is going to be upset that their keynote was stopped, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, if you're going to make the ask and they agree to the ask, if they agree to the ask, then put that in their contract.
In writing.
Yeah.
Okay, so thinking about on-site, because I want to make sure we get to post-event as well for our communications with our last 15 minutes here. Is there anything else we should have talked about on-site crisis communications and what's valuable, other best practices or challenges to be aware of?
Yeah, so you're going to have in your crisis communications plan, and this is something that I teach in my trainings, my workshops, my crisis communications certificate course with MPI. So unfortunately, we're not going to get into the nitty gritty of how to necessarily do this, but you're going to have different levels of crisis. So you're going to have a crisis assessment. You're going to have a level 1, a level 2, level 3, level 4. 4 is going to be, you know, all hell's breaking loose. This is really important that we respond to this. Whereas 1 is going to be, you might not even have to respond at all. So there are certain characteristics about each of these levels that help you know when you are in a certain crisis level. And that's what I go over in my course is, you know, what are the characteristics? How do you know what level you're at right now? But that also goes back to our initial brainstorm. Right. You already have an idea of what, if it happens, would be a level 1 crisis. You will already have an idea of what's going to be a level 2 crisis if it were to happen. You can categorize these crises that you brainstormed in this way. And that's why I talk about doing that as a foundation, because you're going to then, for each of these levels, have a different plan. You're going to have different steps that you're going to take based on the level of crisis that is occurring. Right. So that's why it's really, really important that you create the foundation, because your plan is going to be based off of that foundation.
Yeah, right? That makes perfect sense.
And something that is a very high risk in your risk assessment matrix is going to be a level 4, and it's probably going to have its own separate plan. So there may be 3 or 4 that would be considered very high risk, and that would be considered a level 4 crisis if it were to occur. Those are going to have their own probably separate plans for how to execute on it with crisis communications. Whereas a level 3, any level 3, you're going to execute the same way. Same with level 2, level 1.
Yeah. Okay. And they're the comforting ones, right? The ones that you train the new ones on. And then this is the really big, scary. That's the occasional role play.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go to post-event. So it's been 48 hours or 24 hours, because I always say like the first 72 hours after a crisis, you're still considered on site, because typically when something that's bad enough to have to activate, let's say a 3 or a 4 in your crisis communications, if you've got into that, you're in defense mode. and you're now 72 hours post event. Is that about right? Or is there a longer period of time that you would estimate?
Depends how well you execute your plan.
Ooh.
If you don't know your plan and you execute it poorly, you're going to be spending a lot more than 72 hours to fix the problem
Right.
that happened. There's going to be a lot of things that you're going to have to follow up on. It may take up to a year to fix your brand. We forget that your brand is something that is potentially at risk if you execute poorly on a crisis. Or even longer. Fire Festival is a brand that will never be able to recover. I thought that the Harvest Festival in Vegas would recover immediately and that they'd have a sellout year the following year immediately because people, felt sorry about the event and, to raise money for victims, families, et cetera, et cetera. They have not had that event again. And that's probably due to partially the branding that the brand is now associated with, right? So it's really important. I would say most crises, yes, in the 72 hours if you execute correctly, and the way that your plan is laid out, 72 hours is probably all you're going to need to focus on it. But if something really, really bad happens and you execute poorly on it, it could take up to a year or more to recover.
It was interesting when you and I were talking before we came on air, you were saying, I was like, so who's doing this well? And you were like, yeah. So who's doing this well, Alex?
Not a lot. That's the sad part. I look often for incidents that occur that execute well on a crisis communications plan. The problem is, if they're executing well, you're never going to hear about it, right? Like, that's the goal, is for it to not escalate and not get out of control and not get national news, right? So
but
clearly,
it doesn't come into the breakouts at like the industry events I'm going to. Like, I hear about the really bad stuff. Like, I've never, when you said that, I started thinking about like the last 6 meetings I've gone to, and I'm like, no, everyone's talking about this, but no one says, and here's how we overcame it. So why do you think that?
I know of a few, but they weren't serious crises. It was, there's a fire down the block from our event and we monitored it and, we were never at risk and we let everyone know we were never at risk. Right. There's another one I heard about where it was a vegan event, specifically a vegan event for vegans. And one of the caterers included something that wasn't vegan on their menu. Because they just didn't know that byproduct or that ingredient wasn't considered vegan.
Right.
So, someone came out and posted on their Facebook group or their Facebook page saying, bashing them for not having all their food be vegan at a vegan event. And they had to mitigate that risk and respond. And, there's things like that. And there are tips and tricks you can do in those situations where you will have a really good response, right? Like if I was in that situation, this is actually not what had happened, but if I had been in that situation, I would have sent that attendee a really, really nice gift basket with all vegan products, right? Because what's that person going to do? They're then going to say, oh, thank you so much. Because there's nothing you can do about fixing the caterer situation except never using that caterer again, right? Which is what they actually did, right? They said, we've notified the caterer. We're so sorry. They were unaware. We went over the menu. That was not on the original menu. They brought it without our awareness, blah, 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 right? So they handled it that way. And the person was fine with it. They're like, yeah, we know mistakes happen. But if you want to go that extra mile, send them a gift basket with all vegan products. Because here's what's going to happen. That person who made the Facebook post about how horrible the event was is now going to not only talk about how great and how well they fixed it by giving them this beautiful gift basket, but they're also going to take a photo and post that as well.
Yeah.
Right. So
you actually bring up something interesting there. So let's say that it's a 3-day trade show and conference. So an annual conference, we'll just do that, annual conference and trade show. And I get all the way to my last day I've had a really successful pre-con. I come in, and halfway through my closing general session, things go sideways. And it's like a stage 3, almost stage 4, but no one has died. So, I mean, kind of in between there. Do I send out my annual conference survey and say, how was your experience at this event?
Like 30 minutes after that happened.
But I mean, like, it's automated, right? Because like everybody automates that stuff. And so like, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, if it's bad enough, like, is that, I mean, I guess in my crisis communications plan, somebody's job is now like, go and make sure the automated notices don't go out for this.
This is actually a problem. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because I worked, one of the first conferences I ever worked during the closing keynote, right before the keynote was about to go on stage, you know, we had a ballroom completely packed, and the fire alarm went off.
Oh no.
And we had to usher everyone out. We didn't know that it was a fire drill. The convention center didn't tell us. So everyone had to leave the ballroom, go out the emergency exits, down these stairwells to the back of the convention center. And we didn't even know where the stairwells went out to. And it was a nightmare. And then people came back up when we realized it was a fire drill, and we started telling people, no, it's okay. You don't have to leave. But half the people had already left.
Right.
And then all the people that had showed up late and were in the back of the room, now we're rushing to the front to get the front seats, because all the front seats people had already left. And so then the front seat people came back, and they were very upset that their seat had been taken. So it was a bit of a nightmare, right? And eventually someone on the board started a conga line, and everyone got happy, right? So, but yes, automated messaging is really, really important that you're aware of. And I've talked to event app companies about this, about having an off switch, right? To take all your automated push notifications, all of that stuff, and to just set an off switch, right? So that if something were to happen, we can just put a pause.
Activate crisis mode. Yeah. And I'm thinking, at least the event app companies I work with, I'm like, I don't know of anybody in the back end that has that, but gosh, that's a valuable piece.
We need to start asking that, because I heard stories. Obviously, I was not there, but I heard stories about Las Vegas and the Harvest Festival, where when people were leaving, it was towards the end of the night, and as people were running away from the space, the concert space, and trying to get away from these gunshots, maybe 20 minutes after the gunshots had happened, a push notification, because they had an app for the festival. I think there were multiple stages. My understanding is that a push notification went out saying, thank you all for coming. Can't wait to see you next year. Have a great night. I don't know the exact wording, but it was something to that effect. And talk about needing a pause button. So it's really important that we think about our automated messaging, and that we're talking and making the ask. It's not something that's difficult for these app companies to execute on. Just none of us have been asking them for it, so they're not going to program it, and we need to have a pause button on all event apps.
Now I'm just like, oh my gosh. All right. So thinking about post event, is there anything else in our last 3 or 4 minutes, or as a whole, those best practices? And you've mentioned the crisis communication course that you do. So give us a few, any final parting thoughts that we need to do, and how can we take this deeper to get better at it?
Yeah, just remember that your crisis communications plan is a living document. And you should be practicing it and taking it out. The best place to do it really is like a Google Drive or something that's shared, that's easily shareable to people who need to see it. And whether or not they can edit it or not, is up to you how you set those permissions. But you also need to monitor when it's edited, who edited it, who approved the edit, and why was it edited. So you should have the first page of your crisis plan really should be a sheet that says, okay, what was edited, the date that it was edited, who edited it, who approved the edit, and then why was this edit made. That way you can track those changes. That's really, really important. But you should really be taking this out every quarter or every 6 months and practicing it with your team. Take a little fishbowl, write some crises down on a piece of paper, toss it in the fishbowl, and have people pull one out and then say, okay, how are we going to execute on this? And then go to your plan and see if it works. And if you run into snafus or something that doesn't apply, then you know that you need to make some changes, right? So put it into practice, put it in an exercise, have someone create a case study where, there's an example of a crisis that could happen, and, envelope 1, envelope 2, envelope 3. Okay, now this is the new information that we're getting as the incident occurs, and see if your plan works. If it doesn't, make the edits, right? So there's numerous ways to put it into practice to see if you need to change it, but it is a living document. It's not something that should be in a binder that sits on your shelf and that no one ever sees.
Yeah, it shouldn't go up there with the strategic plan. It should definitely be something you look at it occasionally.
Yes.
Sorry. I feel like I could have bruised from a couple of meetings I had this week. Strategic plans, friends, that needs to be a topic at some point in our world here. Event strategy, what it really means and how you won't suck at it. But
yes, so I am doing my 1-hour session coming up at quite a few places. So I'm going to be down in Orlando for the MPI Sunshine Education Summit. I'm going to be at the MPI Arizona Sunbelt Chapters EduCon doing this session. I will be at Connect. I'm doing a different session on social media ROI, Connect Marketplace. But if you have questions about this and you see me, please feel free to ask. And then I will be doing my 6-hour crisis communication certificate course on Smart Monday at IMEX America. Registration is still open. You get 6 hours of CEUs and you get a certificate in crisis communications, which is great. We've done it 3 times already. It's been extremely successful. Everyone who's taken it has loved it. This was a small taste of what you'd experience there. I encourage you to, look it up. mpiweb.org/crisis, I believe, is the website if you're interested in that. We're also doing an online one in October for that as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Alex. I mean, this is, again, one of those topics where I just feel like every time you hit a topic, we can just keep going deeper and deeper because, crises are so personal to the events that we run. And you just who would think about the bathrooms overflowing as a crisis? But from an operations perspective, hell yeah, that's a crisis. So it's just how do you do it when you're going? Don't forget, you can follow him online. He's active on all of the socials. What is your A-Plaxon?
Yep, A-Plaxon.
And the Instagrams and the YouTubes and the Book of Faces. So get him on there, give him a chance to say hey and thank you. And then from an event icons perspective, you can catch me or Alex or Brant or Will with our amazing schedule we've got coming up. We're going to be live at several shows. We'll be not only able to see Alex live for his communications course in Louisville, we're also going to be producing an event icons there. So if you're coming to join us for Connect Marketplace, stop by and say hi. And if you're joining us at IMEX, come by, and we're recording every day for 3 or 4 hours again. So we're thrilled about that. But if you can't make it to one of those places, we're recorded live every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern at www.event-icons.com. We're available the following Tuesday on all your favorite podcast apps. The best place to watch us live is at eventicons.com, where you can see the show notes, the links to all the resources that he shared today, other things. And then, of course, you can join in the chat, tell your friends and neighbors. We want to know what you think. We do this live because your conversations, your questions, you're going, well, what does that really even mean? Means that we get to take the conversation further. So contact us, let us know your show ideas, and we'll see you next week, y'all.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of #Event Icons.
To catch all the bonus content, resources mentioned, and an invite to our Facebook and LinkedIn groups,
head to www.event-icons.com. Also, let us know what you thought about this week's episode. Share your biggest takeaway. Just tag your post with #Event Icons. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on #Event Icons.